We
Yeah.
have to do that. Oh no.
We are live.
Yes.
We are
Live.
live. Hello and welcome everyone to our panel, the first one of the day, and it is So You Want to Write / Narrate LitRPG. My name is Jack Fields. I'm an author and audiobook narrator, budding that second one, but it is my great pleasure to be the moderator today for such an exquisite host of panelists. We have a panelist on the way, Andrea Parsnow, but for the moment, we'll begin introductions going person to person, and if you could please tell us who you are, a little bit about yourself, and perhaps what you're working on at the moment or something you're excited for in the future, and perhaps we can start with Neil.
Sure. Neil Helligers, actor, narrator, recently re-emerged educator, which has been a kind of nice bringing back in of some older patterns and habits and things like that. I live in Brooklyn. I mostly narrate, I guess, like book by book, probably a gamelet, but enjoy kind of a smattering of various other things like Bukowski poetry, Norwegian literary fiction, and whatever else kind of comes along the way randomly in happenstance. Just finished pickups for Scarlet Citadel, Walking Shadow by Jack Fields in duet and live duet with Tess Irondale as well there. It was a harrowing series of, does Jack mean to say this word or not? We don't know. I made a correction? That was actually not meant to be corrected. That was literally but it's nice to have that one wrapped up, and we'll maybe talk more about it. And I'm very happy to be here and great to see this wonderful group of people.
It's great to have you, Neil. Perhaps I suppose that leads us rather elegantly into an introduction for Tess. Tess, would you possibly go now?
Hey, everybody. I am also a narrator. Had the great delight of collaborating with Neil on Jack's book. Yes, just finished pickups today. That was so much fun. It was my first actual duet narration, which I'd never done before. I've been narrating for about 12 years. I work across all genres, but I started doing LitRPG and Gamelit, I don't know, maybe like 6 years ago, something like that. And now I do a ton of it. And I have a live narration server over on Discord where I narrate LitRPG nearly every day of the week. Nice to meet you all. Hi, everyone.
Thank you so much, Tess. Hey Andy, let's go to one of our wonderful writers now that we have with us. Let's go to Dawn Chapman.
I thought you were going to say Harmon then. Yeah, so I'm Dawn. Most people know me from the LitRPG groups and like basically everywhere. I'm an author as well as an audiobook engineer, so I do tend to work with a few people in the genre. So I've got a little bit of experience on both sides. I'm writing Space Seasons book 7 at the moment, and I'm just doing pickups on my next audiobook for next year with a new publisher, which is Sci-Fi LitRPG. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Dawn. And now, the masked man, the myth, the V for Vendetta cosplayer, Harmon Cooper.
Hey, everybody. I'm Harmon Cooper. You can find out more about me on my live journal, www.harmoncooper.com. Right now, I don't have a live journal. That'd be awesome if I did, though. Right now, I'm working on Doom System Survivor, which will be published next year and likely narrated by Wayne Mitchell. I'm working on. I just finished Reborn Assassin, which is why I'm wearing this, because I released a second book and I finished the third book, and so Jeff Hayes will be narrating those, and they will be out in the spring. And I am working on Aetherforged Rebirth, which is my first co-write with Luke Chimolenko, and I should be finishing my part of that in December, so that's coming as well. And then finally, I'm working on Way of the Immortals 4 for Neil to narrate.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so I can actually like put a cap on all of that.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's what I'm doing. And also I've worked with all these narrators, and like I like them all so much, and I wish I could work with them more. I really enjoyed working with Tess, and I really enjoyed working with Andy, so it's awesome.
Absolutely. Well, look, a man both prolific and talented is Harmon. Now, let's go to our last brilliant audiobook narrator, the one, the only Andrea Parsnow. Could you give a little introduction for yourself?
Hello, everybody. I'm Andrea Barstow, and I have no sense of time. I'm so sorry I'm late. I'm an audiobook narrator. I work in LitRPG, fantasy, sci-fi, harem, all of that stuff. I hugely enjoy it. I'm another Discord streamer. I stream my workday over on Discord, Andrea Parsnow, discord.gg/Andrea Parsnow. Sorry. I decided to do it in the wrong order. But yeah, I've been in the genre for a long time. I love it here. So it's It's like this is why I started narrating. So I started narrating to narrate LitRPG. So I love it here.
Indeed, it is a genre that we all will have in kinship. And speaking of, let's get to my first question. Okay, so in order for myself and for our lovely audience to understand how you get into LitRPG writing and narration, I think it's important that we get a hold on how you became interested in writing and narration to begin with. That way we can establish maybe a good, strong framework to build on, and in addition, note a few examples of amazing authors and performers who might in turn inspire us. To that end, who were the writers and narrators who influenced you through the important years of reading and listening? Andrea, we can start with you, and we can move back the other way.
Woohoo! As far as writers that I've been inspired by, I'm an early Stephen King reader. I read Stephen King as a kid and kind of grew up with that. And I always liked the weirder books, like Bag of Bones, Insomnia, stuff like that, Dark Tower, that kind of thing. And as I got older, I fell in love with like satire, like Christopher Moore is phenomenal. And it was like through those lenses that I got introduced to LitRPG and just fell in love with the fantasy escape of it. So writers, I like comedy. So anything that can make me laugh and anything that can make me feel something is usually something that I enjoy, as long as it's not too sad.
100%. Thank you, Andrea. Harmon?
So the question was, why did I do this? What did I do this? And who inspired me to do this? I'm sorry. I'm not zoning out. I was just trying to think, like there seemed like two parts of that. So I want to get it right.
Don't you worry, my brilliant friend. Who were the writers and narrators who influenced you through the important years of reading and listening?
Okay, so I don't know who these narrators were, but when I was a child, I still kind of can almost in the back of my mind hear the music. I would listen to these audio cassettes before I'd go to sleep. Yes, cassettes, and they would tell like these like fantasy stories, and I have tried desperately to find what it was because I don't know what it was, but I knew there was music and I knew there was like kind of like soothing voice telling like kind of like, you know, children's fantasy stories. And I guess that kind of narration wise, that kind of like put that seed in my head. But then I wouldn't have thought about it for at least 25 years until I started to listen more to narration. And now I actually, when I write, I try to find out who the narrator is ahead of time. So I can kind of think of how they will narrate it, because like the people I work with, I really want it to fit what they're able to do. And as for writers that inspired me, I mean, I'm a little bit of an outlier when it comes to that, because I'm not like the type that can be like, well, I read all of these fantasy series and then well, hold on, let's really talk about why you couldn't fly a hawk to Mordor or whatever. That's never been my vibe. My vibe was just, I really liked comic books. I wanted to be a musician. It was too hard to be a musician because you have to cooperate with other people, and you know, like drummer's girlfriend's broken up, whatever. And so I had started writing before I was a musician, and then so I just started writing on my own because I'm like, well, at least I can control this schedule, and I don't have to worry about like, you know, this guy's drug addiction, this guy's this, or this show, and then it just blossomed from there. And so now I mostly get into actually creative nonfiction. So I listen to LitRPG, and then I usually read creative nonfiction. So I read things like Craig Childs, who writes Southwest Memoirs.
That's fascinating. Thank you, Harmon. Dawn, could we get your thoughts?
I'm kind of like Harmon, really. I started with the old cassettes. Storyteller was the actual thing. Might be the same thing Harmon was listening to. But I used to, as a kid, when we were sick, my nan used to come around and was always pushing. We had to turn the tape over, and because me and my brother were both sick and in opposite rooms, the cassette player was in the middle of both rooms, and my nan had to come up the stairs every single time to turn the tape player over. But I started writing when I was like 6. I've got stories going back till I was like literally could write. I grew up with sci-fi, with all the old 80s sci-fi shows. My dad was into bikes and sci-fi. That's just me all over. So Frank Herbert, Dune, you know, just all Ender's Game, anything like that. That's me, and that's kind of like what just keeps me inspired. And that the genre itself, our genre, is more fantasy based. But I can't break my roots, so I do tend to spin like the sci-fi stuff. So, but that's all like where my inspiration comes from. So.
100%. You find the rather ironically, perhaps the gravity of science fiction rather compelling.
Yeah, it is. For me, it is. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and for myself as well. Wonderful genre. Tess, could we get your thoughts?
I wish I had a story as sort of romantic as Andy's. I love, Andy, how you got into this. You haven't spoken yet, but I mean, I just that you were a fan and that you wanted to participate participate in narration because you were a fan. It's so funny. I read in my life outside of the booth genres that I generally don't narrate, honestly. Because I narrate so much fiction and fantasy, I read pretty exclusively nonfiction. So I'm really, really into this author right now, Patrick Radden Keefe. His book "Say Nothing" is really incredible. I believe it was just turned into a streaming series. Yeah. So I in my non-booth life, I definitely engage primarily in nonfiction.
Okay, interesting. And Neil, could you cap us off for this round?
Sure. I think my earlier influences. I think I sort of a rooting in fantasy, like in along these sort of Dragonlance, Forgotten Realms kind of books. But really, my heart belongs to sci-fi, like kind of like Dawn was saying as well too. Like, and that ranged from like Silver Era writers, Asimov and all those kind of guys. But also, I think like Ian Banks, the culture
Yeah.
novels are pretty much like if
Brilliant.
I could have like this question comes up a lot, like what would you reread, or if I could have the knowledge of those books removed from my brain so that I could read them again as if for the first time, I would submit myself to that no matter the side effects. That's an exaggeration, but with some like mild side effects, I would go along with that. And how I got involved narrating audiobook, it was kind of like a lot of things with acting for me, it's sort of a series of happenstance and coincidence and what seemed right and what sort of fit my sort of my skill set. Like from the whole of sort of acting pattern and getting into the booth, it was really like the initiation. It was like 9 years ago. Tantor just sent me a gamelet. It was the first one I had seen of it. That was like proper. That I'd seen. There's all the other ones kind of around that. That sort of like had elements of what we call gamelet now. I guess in the whole style versus genre debate, right? But that Russian gamelet 9 years ago, Perimeter Defense, Michael Adamonov from Magic Dome was like the first. Was like I'm like, what is this? And they're like, yeah, this is gamelet. I'm like, great. I'm going to burrow into here and I'm going to make this my home, as intrinsically and as deep as I possibly can. That's about it.
It's engaging. Okay. Well, indeed, you have sort of forerun my next question, which means that perhaps we can start with you, Neil, and you can deepen that answer. I think that would be very, very useful and interesting. Yes, exactly. So yes, indeed, life is so chock full of media, all categories and subgenres, and I'd love to know how LitRPG first pinged on your radars, and then once it did, how your life swerved in that direction. And I suppose, Neil, because you've already given us some insight into that, perhaps it might be also interesting to find out your feelings around that sort of ping on the radar. Oh, LitRPG, maybe that's different from what I've heard of before, and how that attraction grew into the beginnings of a career. We can start with Neil and go back that way.
Yeah, I just turned off my camera because it was starting to skip on me.
No
when
worries.
It came to like talking of something important, my booth's been messing with me. So kind of what I was just saying. It was sort of happenstance, and also like, and I think because that was my first gamelet series, it has formed my optic as to what I kind of really feel about the style genre, which is that if there are no screens, if there are no notifications, if there are no pops up, that could probably be more classified as fantasy. I don't care if you're a wizard with a staff and you're riding a horse amongst a bunch of orcs. Like, if a screen pops up in front of you and says you just gained 10 something something, that's sci-fi. That is demonstrating a a fantasy environment. But the root of that, and that kind of I think comes to like I got into an argument with like a sort of I was at a bar. I was a little drunk. It was a kind of famous author, and I got into an argument with him about how sci-fi and fantasy is a continuum. He's like, "That's not true. That's not a thing. Everyone, don't believe this person." I'm like, "Fuck you, Dave." I think when I was narrating that, when I first heard about this, having being a gamer, and particularly on the sort of the space battle sci-fi kind of end of things as well too, I was like, this is brilliant, this is perfect, this is exactly where I want to kind of like I said before, sort of make a home for myself. But also it became, I mean, that was a little different because those were all the Russians that I was kind of initially narrating, and there was no contact with them whatsoever. It was all through Tantor, it was all sort of intermittently through Magic Dome, who were nominally some, at least what's his name is pretty much online and active through their Facebook. and it kind of expanded from there. But they're very gratefully graduated into authors that I could talk to and become friends with and game with and all those things. And that's really has become, I think, the true expression of I love doing all sorts of different kind of audiobooks, and I cherish all those different opportunities to do whether it's nonfiction, poetry, or literary fiction or whatever. But I like my root in what I read is sci-fi and fantasy, having it be this wonderful kind of emergence of independent publishing, authors that are sort of in touch and connected with their audiences as well, and it really becomes a collaboration. Narration can get super solitary, even I think Tess and Eddie will attest to this. Even if you're in your booth, it is, and there, or in your discords I should say, and there's people right there, it still feels that way, but it's really not. And I've been trying to really lean into that recently, being that any moment I'm in the booth with someone's book and a production team, it's an intense team effort between all of these different people, and we're all working together to make this crazy thing that we call style genre work.
Thank you, Neil. That was comprehensive and very compelling.
You couldn't see it, but I was dancing around and throwing
Well,
flames
I
at
expect
at the same
nothing
time.
less.
Yeah,
Probably a rumba or perhaps a paso doble.
possibly.
Tess Irondale, could we get a sense of how LitRPG pinged on your radar, and then perhaps a deeper sense of the beginnings of your career, those first roots that built this great tree?
Yeah, I mean, the beginning of my career, I was invited to audition at Audible, and started working for them initially. That was in 2013, I think. And so I'd say for like the first maybe 4 or 5 years of my career, I was definitely sort of fantasy and fantasy adjacent in those genres. And I think in 2017, Podium offered me my first book. And so my relationship with LitRPG comes directly from Podium, frankly. They just started offering me books, and I can't for the life of me remember what my first in the genre was, or even game lit what it was. I'd have to look back in my on my own Audible list there. But yeah, it just sort of began sliding in. And, once you begin working in one particular genre for a publisher, they tend to sort of like to send you a lot of things in that world. And because the Lit RPG community is so tight-knit and interconnected, I think a lot of things just sort of kept flowing my way out of that. And that's why I love narrating it for the incredible fans and listeners and authors.
It's marvelous. It's kind of a benevolent typecasting to a certain extent. That's very interesting. Okay, Dawn, we've gotten a sense of then some science fiction origin point for you. And by the way, I can't get over your 2 examples. They're brilliant. Dune and Ender's Game, terrific novels. How did LitRPG first ping, and then what was the beginning like?
For me, I like with sci-fi. So my first series is sci-fi, and I joined one of the Narrators groups because I knew nothing about audiobooks, and I met Jeff Hayes well before I even knew he was involved in LitRPG. It was Travis Bagwell that came into one of our sci-fi groups, and he said, "Hey guys, I don't understand. I've got over 1,000 reviews in 24 hours," and we were like, "What?" you joke. So we all had to go and look, but I still didn't know what LitRPG was, and it was probably another maybe 12 months. Jeff Hayes was started because I listened to Jeff Hayes doing the sci-fi first, and I used to review his early books, and then I met sort of like all the other people that were involved. Andrea, who was doing stuff for William D. Arend at the time, and that was also linked through Jeff Hayes through sort of little connections there. I didn't start writing it. It's probably till about another sort of 12 months after that. And my first series I co-wrote with someone, which didn't do very well. But then I wrote Patera Online, which I managed to snag Andrea for, which was just fantastic. It was literally just a pre-made cover that I seen somebody post in a group, one of my author friends. And I was like, hey, so it's Mad Max meets sort of just fantasy lit RPG world, and that was my first real series, and I wrote it within sort of probably about 6 months. So that's me.
You were inspired. There was a pre-made cover, and your mind latched onto it.
Yeah, so it was the first cover with Maddie. It's literally just like a Mad Max car and she's just sitting on the bonnet of it. And it was just like, I just latched onto that, and I was like, I need a series with this like Mad Max car and
Wow.
dragons and all kinds of things. So that's where it came from.
Speaks to the ability of a writer of your caliber and perhaps aspiring writers as well to see to have an image or perhaps just something they see and for that to kick off their imagination, to kick off a career. That's awesome, Dawn. Thank you for that. Harmon, could we get your beginnings, how LitRPG began for you?
I shared this the other day, but I had never actually shared it until the other day, so it's probably fresh for everyone here, even people I've hung out with before, like Neil. In about somewhere between 2008 and 2010, I took mushrooms with my dad, and I gave up video games because I thought they were wasting my time. And the reason is we took too strong of a dose. There were mushrooms growing in the field across from our home, and we gathered a bunch of them, and my dad's like, I'll make a tea out of this. And I'm like, yeah, dude, let's fucking go. And he made a tea, but I don't think he realized the dose. And so like, I mean, it wasn't quite like somebody's like body separating, but it was close. And I was playing a video game at the time and it glitched. And I was like, no, I got to stop playing video games. So I didn't play video games for like 5-6 years. I moved to Asia and I didn't play for a very long time. And I missed them so much that I started writing books about video games. So LitRPG is just what I do. Like I didn't try to ever get into the genre. The genre kind of just happened when I started. It was already happening in other parts of the world, but I was just missing video games. So I started writing the Feedback Loop in 2015, which is Gamelit. And that's which was inspired by Ready Player One video games, Bukowski and Sword Art Online. And it was only after about 7 or 8 months later, I read Bagwell's book. And on the back, it said that he was from Austin. And I'm like, oh, I'm from Austin, Texas, too. So I should email this dude and say, like, yo, I'm from Austin. I wrote a game style book. And I emailed him and he was like, oh, you need to join all these Facebook groups. And so that's how I met everyone. And that's how I am here now. So it was kind of just something that, like, I missed video games. I play them now when I have a chance, but I missed them so much that I just started writing about them. And it just sort of became my career. Now I'm sitting here wearing a bolo tie and a mask amongst people that I care about. So,
well, you the sort of the beautiful symmetry of missing video games, yearning for them, and then creating that sort of filling that void is only sort of mildly fractured by the fact that it started with like a Hunter S. Thompson Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas experience.
Yeah. I don't recommend, if your parents are alive, my dad passed in 2018, but I don't recommend taking hallucinogenic with your parents. It's too much. But I mean, unless you're that kind of dude, so.
Yes, life lessons with Harmon Cooper. The more you know. Andy, yes, indeed, the rainbow, Neil, exactly.
I did want to add something that Dawn said because it relates to Andy, and so that's why I wanted to add it. Dawn said she saw for Futara Online, she saw a cover and was inspired, and then wrote, and then Andy narrated. Andy, that's the same thing that happened with Death's Mantle. I saw this meme of like death, like a Grim Reaper and an angel together, and like I was like, oh, I should write a book about those two characters. And then I just put it on the back burner, and I was looking for my next thing to pitch, and I came across the meme that I had saved from like 2 years prior, and that's what became Death Mantle, which she narrated. So
that is amazing.
It is.
I didn't know that. That's incredible. And also, by the way, award-winning series, Death's Mantle. It's a Earphones award winner.
Well, this way. Wait, other way. I always, you guys, the actors are so much better with camera angles. I can't see. I said I could see earlier. I was half lying. Like, so if I lean in, it's like I'm trying to read if someone has a comment. So I'm like, so if I go like this, it's like.
Yeah, it takes us to some sort of a Korean show like Don't Die or some sort of. Anyway, yes, directly into the sort of nightmare fever dream, and honestly, I'm here first.
Sorry to interrupt, everyone.
Oh, not in the slightest. Thank you for doing so. And Andy, let's cap things off with you, and then we'll move on to the next topic.
I need you to repeat the question because the sentence I got into writing because I did shrooms with my dad, or I got into LitRPG because I did shrooms with my dad in the bathroom, immediately erased all thought from my brain, and I cannot.
No, you're fine. So Chess actually alluded to it earlier. She was saying that there was a kind of a fan quality that you had that evolved into the career. So what about the beginnings of your career?
I'll truncate this because it's kind of a long train because it starts with like Critical Role and then like yada yada yada. But it's mainly I watched SAO with my husband, fell in love with it. I thought the idea was really cool. Hayes came up to me one day and was like, "You've got to hear this book. It's like SAO, but it's in a book. It's like they're in a game, but it's a book." And at the time I wasn't listening to audio super heavily for like fiction stuff. I was just listening. I listened to things like Killing Kennedy and crap, like stuff that was just nonfiction stuff on audio. And he said, and plus you've got to listen to the audio because there's this guy. He's incredible. He sounds exactly like a woman when he's speaking as a woman. Like his female voices are insane. It was Jeff Hayes. Jeff Hayes is the nexus for all of us. But yeah, it was Jeff Hayes. And I listened to it and I was like, wow, that guy really is incredible. It was Other Life Dreams by William D. Arend. And it was a lit RPG. And Hayes looked into it and he was like, did you know this is a whole genre? Like there's a whole bunch of these. And I'm like, holy crap, it was like back in 2015 or so. And so I started Ascend Online, Continue Online, I started like just absorbing all of them that I could find. Way of the Shaman, like I absolutely adored them. And it was, I fell in love with the genre and I connected with an author and like kind of, they suggested, you might want to try narration because you don't know what you're doing. I didn't know what I was going to do at that point, job wise. And I was in theater anyway, so I'm trying to smash this story down for people who have heard it before. That was the end. I just went from there. But I started narration specifically because I was like, well, but I want to narrate in LitRPG because I don't want to just narrate romance because I had like looked around on ACX and all that I could find for my vocal type was all just like kind of trad romance stories. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. They're just not my preference for narrating. So it was like, oh, but I don't want to do that. Okay, well, you know what? No, you know what? Screw it. I'm just going to start auditioning for anything that's not a female. I'll just try that. I'll just start auditioning for everybody because I want to try this. LitRPG is amazing. So yeah, that was it. I just, in the face of bad sense, I charged forward. It was awesome. I love it. And I've never looked back. It's amazing. I love
Andy, a genius that you are, you have brilliantly segued into our next thing. Speaking of charging forward, okay, so we have your sense of your beginning now. You had your start. Each of you either as a performer, a narrator, or as a writer. And I don't think it's flattery, kind of more of a statement of fact, just to say that each of you is very successful and impressive exemplars in the industry. So it's useful, I think, for people watching, in my opinion, to understand how the humble starting point could become, your position currently in what do we say, the sparkling pantheon of greats in the LitRPG sphere. So I think it's useful to maybe gauge the pragmatics, maybe the mechanics, some of the obstructions maybe you faced on that way, and sort of a bridge from the humble beginnings forward. And we can start with Neil here.
I think it's sort of synonymous with how I got sort of my way starting into audiobook, which again is like I was saying before, it was sort of a happenstance between mostly doing live theater and then mostly doing some live theater and some on camera commercial work into some commercial voiceover, which kind of completely flummoxed me. Like I worked a little bit, but the whole like sell it but throw it away thing kind of just didn't work for me. But then it coming around to having been, I could always listen to audiobooks on long drives and things like that. Frank Muller and Will Patton and things and narrators like that. But by the time it seemed like, everything that I had, all of the training that I had happened to have like a really good voice teacher in grad school, having always had a book or two kind of like being dragged around as well. It made it sort of seem like this was a natural thing to do, but it was an entirely different, aside from all that other work that I had done, whatever other acting work I had done, narration is a completely separate industry. It's really publishing. It's not entertainment. So it's even there's a lot of overlap with unions and things like that. But it's different now than when I got started because it was as relatively small as the industry is now. It was a fraction of that before. But it remains the same thing, and it remains the same kind of.
Oh, have we got a frozen Neil? I think so.
This happened yesterday. Yeah, he was going in and out.
Is my voice back? Okay, yeah, I'll just keep that off. Yeah,
your voice is back.
Yeah. So I'll just, before I completely fade off into oblivion again. There's lots of long-term strategy goals you can make, and there's lots of branding, and there's whole full panels we can talk about that stuff. But I think the only immediate thing for any narrator, I don't think this is true for just people, is to just be a real fucking human being, is to talk with people, be communicative, be honest, be yourself, and trust in that moment to moment kind of like communication has gotten me, I think, like not I don't know, gotten me farther is not exactly the right phrase, but it's kept me connected to what I'm doing and has allowed me to make the next step in the most optimal way, because I'm making decisions based on what works for me, who are the people that I'm talking with, who are the people that I'm connecting with, who are the people that I want to work for and want to develop, while getting the opportunity to kind of live in these amazing worlds set up by writers who are very often friends and who I've worked with for years. So that, again, just in terms of like what I would say to a young narrator starting out is just meet people, just try to communicate with people. We have all these tools to do so. Now we can be doing things back in person, take advantage of those opportunities, have conversations at bars with people about obscure shit. Doing all those things is there's many, like I said, there's so many other things. There's training, there's workshops, there's a lot of other things, but at the core of it, if you're not a human being and being real in that connection with people, then you're doing yourself a disservice and you're setting yourself up for some kind of disappointment or loneliness.
Well said, Neil. Well said. And I think that's a brilliant pillar for us to build, to begin building this sort of temple of development, how from performance beginnings to authorial beginnings as well. Tess, could you pick up on that and add a pillar of your own?
Yeah. Speaking to any narrators out there who are either trying just to get started in the industry in general or get started in LitRPG, it is worth noting that it has become twice, if not more, difficult to become a narrator now than it used to be. We all started out sort of pre-COVID or long before COVID. During COVID, the industry really exploded. There are so many new voices, and it has become considerably more challenging for everyone in the business. So it was it was just really different when we were starting out. It takes a lot more work. It takes a lot more effort now. Say for anyone wanting to get started in this genre in particular, if you are not a performer, or have not had any kind of acting or vocal training, I would definitely seek out some kind of narration training program. And there are many, and there are so many resources. When I first began, there were absolutely no resources. I mean, you can now just watch free videos online. I would also specifically say reach out to the narrators in the genre. And most people, you'll probably find, are very happy to offer words of advice or assistance. I'm always very generous if anyone reaches out to me. So I would say that would be my number one. Yeah, that would be my number one piece of advice. Just connect with the narrators who are already doing it.
Thank you so much, Tess. And I think our structure is growing more and more supported with each of these. Dawn, as now we're going to the writer's perspective now, in terms of development, the humble origin to being much more successful. How did that manifest?
What, for me personally, or you mean what would you prefer? A little bit of both.
I think finding out your personal take on how maybe some obstructions and developments that you had would ring true, I think.
Okay, so I originally started with like novels and stuff when I was like 16, and then I actually went to film school. I went into script writing, and I spent 15 years doing script writing, and that business is really cutthroat. And I got very, very disheartened because I'd sell things, they'd get greenlit, I'd get actors attached, and then the next thing you know, somebody'd leave or they needed more money, and it just kept falling apart. So nothing even though I was selling stuff, nothing kind of ever got going. And it was just, I used to take part in Script Frenzy, which was part of NaNoWriMo, and they stopped doing it. I was like, well, what am I going to do now then? So somebody said, why don't you try writing one of your scripts into a novel? And that was like, oh, I'll try that. So that's kind of like, so I went back to my original roots, but I found the transition from script writing to actually go back into prose very difficult. And my first book actually took 2 years for me to write, and that's not like me. And that was because like when I started going into editing, I was literally just writing it like scripts, and I do still write a lot of my stuff. Everyone says that my stuff does extremely well in audio. It's not as easy to read, but it does extremely well in audio because that's like my background. It's very fast paced. I have to really, really focus to slow down and write my prose and break scenes up so that people get a chance to breathe. For sort of like most of it, I'd say for me, studying the craft of actually writing prose, going back to my roots, reading the really good books, all the sort of like the sci-fi, the fantasy, digging back in, and then obviously within the genre itself, I think I was maybe 18 months into writing it when I got my first audio job, which was literally because I did a lot of script transcribing. So listening for me is sort of like where that came from. So, and then I started getting more and more sort of like, oh, you can audio proof this and you can do this for me. And so that kind of built on that side of things. But listening to books really helps writing as well, because you listen to how it sounds to how you could write it better, especially with characters and dialogue, just bits of everything really. So I've got a background of multitudes, but I basically study, read. That's kind of like the best thing. Road is very, very good for new writers. There's a lot of guides. The Council of Eternal Hiatus, they have guides on their Discord channels. There's lots of people you can come in and you can get support off us as sort of like as mentors, as authors, and that's build yourself up, meet people like Neil said. That's talking. Discord is the best place for our genre for people.
Thank you, Don. I found it particularly interesting when you were talking about the need to adapt sort of a filmic mindset of pure dialogue, assumedly with perhaps some stage directions, into prose. And if we have time, I'd love to ask you a little bit more about that. I might just take a little note in our chat. But Harman, well, it's very interesting. But Harman, could we possibly get your thoughts on developing as a writer from your beginnings to now?
Well, I think next year I will write my 100th book as Harman. I wrote a bunch of novellas too before, so I'm probably past 100. But what I've learned in all of that is very specific for what works for me, and so I don't know. I guess what I'm saying is what I've learned through all that is, what you have to find what works for you, if that makes sense, and not doubt it, because like some people are plotters, some people are what they call pantsers. I call it gardening. Some people can do both. I can do both, but I think that only is because when I was a musician, I was very like, I could play to anything. Like I could just pick up an instrument, and if music on the radio, whatever, I can play by ear very well. And so that has helped me adapt in that way. But whatever works for you should work for you, and you shouldn't, you can read writing advice books and all those things, but just because it works for Stephen King, well, cocaine also works for Stephen King, and maybe you shouldn't do that. Like there's a lot of different things that people pick from like, well, this author said do this, or one example is Actus is really prevalent, right? Or he's really, he writes a lot, like, well, he can write this much. And, if it works for you and you're able to do it successfully, do that and stick with it. And so one of those things that within that time, or within those guidelines has worked for me is this concept. So I'm from Austin, which is pretty hippie. And years ago, I read this idea of doing without attachment. And I don't know what the fuck it was. And I finally realized it recently because I started researching what it was. It's from the Bhagavad Gita. It's something that Krishna was famous for in one of the scenes, but it's basically you do and you put everything you have into it, and then when it's done, you put it on the shelf and it's done. And this is good and bad, but it's helped me a lot because, some projects work out very well, what you want them to do, some don't. And I've seen with writers, a lot of them are, they get obsessed with one idea, or they get obsessed with like one, this is going to be the best thing since Dune or whatever. And it's not. and you're going to release it, and somebody's going to care or somebody's not, or you're going to release it and something that you think's like, hey, this book's about a guy who can turn into a salamander, does better or something. You have no control over it. And so being able to do something and then completely detach yourself from it is, if you're trying to be prolific, which you kind of have to be to do this full time, is a very helpful way to do that. The only thing else I'll say about that, there's only one downside to that, is that when I detach so much from previous work that I don't remember or know anything about it. So, someone will say, hey man, the feedback loop, you said that Quantum did this. And I'm like, I honestly, it's like you came up and told me something from like a random story. I really don't know what you're talking about, and I don't know how to answer that. And I recently, though, I thought this was really funny. I recently found a connection to this, though, of all people, Eminem, and it was this. I saw this interview with him, and he was talking about like he doesn't know his old lyrics, so he'll like have to like Google them because he has written so many lyrics and so many songs that he has to like. Someone will mention something and he'll be like, I don't even remember what I said. So he'll have to like get on Google and, the song that he wrote 15 years ago. It's very much like that when you do without attachment. So I pour everything I have into a project, and then when it's done, I don't know anything about it. And it's bad. Like if Neil has a question or something, he was recently narrating Arcane Cultivator. I finished it. So I don't know. Like if there's like a question about something, I have to actually reread the entire thing, that section, for me to be able to answer that, because I really don't know. And so that would be my advice, if there was any advice within that.
Certainly, Harman, I found it enlightening, and dare I say it, zen. Andy, could you help us out in terms of your development?
Yes, absolutely. And as far as like getting started or advice for people coming into it kind of thing, Tess and Neil both had amazing answers from like the business side and the mechanical side of it, because that is it. Like it is there are far more people in it, and being a real person is key. Those are amazing answers. I'll give like a kind of a practically type answer, because I was reminded of it recently. A friend I have is starting out and like getting started in narration, and I was talking to them and I realized there's something that like you kind of have to hunt down this stuff, so it might be kind of helpful if you are getting started or you're looking to. Software is one of those really difficult things. Your DAW is going to be important, but it's very individual to you. Things you may want on top of that: RX Isotope is extremely useful. It has a mouth declicker in it that is going to save your life rather than having to painstakingly remove mouth clicks. Second Opinion is a utility that Neil Tess,
Stephen J. Cohen.
Thank you. Stephen J. Cohen has developed that helps check your files against ACX. It's super helpful, so you don't have a bunch of stuff getting kicked back. Things like that are really difficult. Joining the narrator Facebook groups and listening, reading, finding out whatever people are talking about, getting, taking the average of things, not just one person, making sure you know who you're listening to. But honestly, Neil and Tess have it. Being genuine and just being you is going to be your strongest asset. And working in LitRPG specifically, like working in these genres specifically, it is going to be a massive asset to have watched animation in general, know nerd culture in some aspects, play video games, anything like that. All those things are going to be extremely useful at voicing things. Like if you don't, it's perfectly fine. You're going to be filling in gaps that people who like have done those things didn't have to fill in, essentially. But it's a beautiful, like this genre is amazing because it expects more from you, but it gives more back, if that makes sense. We have to have bigger voices, bigger acting, bigger stuff, but at the same time, it's this incredibly rewarding thing because fans are insanely devoted and people are the community is fabulous here. And for the love of God, I hope that was the actual question, was getting started, because I just realized that I might have answered the wrong question midway.
Not in the slightest, Andrea. You were on point and fabulous as usual. Now, look, we get to the part that I admittedly am most excited about. No secrets between panelist and moderator. I am a new author in the space and a very new narrator. And I'm sure there are lots of people tuning in who have felt the first little kind of, cinders of interest in becoming a writer or narrator themselves.
Don't do it.
So my friends, don't you dare. encourage. In fact, kindle those cinders, my friends. But give us your most niche and extraordinary tips and tricks of the trade, like really nitty-gritty niche stuff. Think fun little tips. Neil, let's start with you.
Let's see. I mean, I was thinking about that, what Andy just said too, about like, it really helps to have spent a lot of your own time marinating in all of this, and not just because in a sense of like, here's what I say. When you, Andy, when you first said that, my thought was the quip that came into my head was, how else we know that dwarves are Scots and that elves speak RP,
Precisely.
but I think that here's my niche advice: is to know all those things, know all those like quote unquote like tropes or rules in order to disrupt them. Exactly. Yes. And he said in order to throw them out. I refuse to do elves with British accents because it doesn't make any sense. If you listen to Elvish language, Tolkien, whoever made it up, it doesn't sound like anything Anglo or Saxon. To me, that all sounds more Scandinavian. So like I've always been throwing my elves north of the continent, there as well too. Or I just did a book where all the dwarves were more Germanic, because that makes more sense to me as well too. So it's about with Gamelit. There are a million tiny style choices you have to make. Oftentimes, like I said before, in collaboration with the author, or with the publisher. And it's that, and because there's within Gamelit, there's a lot of like isekai similarity in terms of like, dude in one world, now another world. How do I understand this thing? There's a lot of style choices you can make in there, and the uniqueness and not just cleverness, but in service of telling a unique story you can make of those choices. I think this is, and I would venture to say this is probably as true as for authors as it is for narrators. The more invested you can be in that world building process in order to make those nuance of choices, the better. Like with Arcane Cultivator with Harmon, we've been mapping out his world that he's created for this in terms of like a North American kind of tapestry of voices. I think very often fantasy casts across into this either mid-Atlantic or completely across the Atlantic in terms of like Britishy sounding voices, but they're still, and that don't exist in any actual culture. People want to listen to voices that they want to know. So our sort of slight genre bend was to make it like, well, this port city is, everyone from here is New England or Boston. Everyone from the mid area, the plains over here is like, they're all from Minnesota, and to make choices like that in understanding of the way these things usually work, so you can add something different. And also it's this comes down to this sort of similar thing about, which seems to be slipping a little bit in narrators. I keep hearing this about prep. The reason why prep is important is not because so you can plan it all out, is so that you can have those conversations. It is impossible to do world building conversations with an author if you're going chapter by chapter cold read, or even if you're reading ahead a chapter or two as you're kind of going through. I get, like, you can work that way, and a lot of brilliant people do, and I applaud them all for managing that. For me, I appreciate having the opportunity to have those conversations, so that's why I do that preparation, so I can make choices, so I can identify tropes, then I can throw them out the window.
Thank you, Neil. Neil revealing his scholarship of the prose and poetic edda while he gives niche tips and tricks.
And my internet didn't go out at the same time. That was miraculous.
That is miraculous. Well done, invoking the spirit of Odin to keep your digital life safe. And Tess, could we get some niche tips and tricks from you?
Yeah, some niche advice for newer narrators. When you do your prep, you obviously read the entire script, but then go through and use the search function and look for the words accent, dialect, and voice.
That's
and just fast forward through and just click ahead. So you don't find yourself in a scenario where you've given someone an old man accent and or old man voice, I should say, and it turns out he's a young man, or you have possibly misgendered a character. It's rare that happens, but it can happen in smaller characters. And I would also stress, it's very important in this genre to keep track of all of your characters, because LitRPG tends towards long series. And I was not prepared for the length of some of these series when I first began. You don't always know from your publisher. They don't always tell you when it's the start of a 20-book series. So you sort of ignore, the secretary here and the soldier there and the general there. And then, 7 books later, your author tries to fuck with you and bring them back. So it's just worth taking the time, and there are many different ways of keeping track of characters and voices. I've got plenty of advice on that specifically. Reach out to me if you want to know, but yes, be cautious about that.
Concise and brilliant. I intend to now do that myself. Thank you, Tess. I would have absolutely fallen into that pitfall. Dawn, could we get a sense of a kind of niche tip and trick of the writing trade?
I'm going to kind of riff off what the narrators kind of said,
Please.
basically, because keeping track of characters for us and stats is extremely important. And I think if you're automatically doing the character work in the background, when it actually comes, because our genre love audiobooks. Every single post that goes to any of the groups, they're always asking, when's the audiobook out? They want to know. So you kind of have to have it in your mind as you're setting out. And to me, keeping track of your characters and kind of what you want from them, what accents, what just the basic world building questions that Neil would then come to you and ask. What does such and such person sound like? How, give me sort of like background, anything. If you've already got the files of it already written out, it's just literally just copy paste and you can send. And keeping those files for your narrators is super important, but also for yourself, because you do write long series like me. I'm going back to Space Seasons now, which I haven't written in 4 years. And it's like Harmon said, it's like, I don't remember writing any of this. It's like I had to reread the whole series and listen to the audiobooks and get it all back in my head before I even started. But I have massive Scrivener files with hundreds of characters, it's all dated, all my timelines done in Aeon timeline, so it's specific. These are all kind of things that if you're planning long series, just do it as you can do it, because if you write a series and then have to go back and think, holy crap, you've got 7 books worth of stuff, you can't sift through it. It's impossible. So it's keep track of everything for both yourself and for your narrators. It saves you hundreds of hours worth of time. That's my biggest tip.
It's a brilliant tip, and one that I Neil and Tess, I hope I followed a little bit. Oh dear. Well, I know my friend Rachel Kirk for her novel sent Andrea Parsino 35 pages of character-based text. So I was not, hopefully, that intense.
She exaggerated, for the record.
It was said like 6 pages, so it was manageable.
It was like 10. Yeah, it was a lot, but it was super helpful.
Mr. Cooper, Harmon, could we get a niche writing tip or trick?
Yes, I have a lot of tips and tricks that will make your life easier if you decide, which you should be very cautious of going on this journey. One is you can't out niche the niche. So look, some of these people, man, like you're never going to be as nerdy as them, and they're going to be able to reference crazy things that you're like, well, the Chinese web novel that has 3,000 chapters. Well, if you get to chapter 2,945, you can see that this blah, blah, blah. Like it's insane. And I've felt that pressure before. Like, I don't know enough about these references and the genre. Do I not know enough about the genre? This goes back to questioning yourself or trying to fit some mold. Like if you can't write to market really with LitRPG, which is one of the issues that I have with organizations like 20 to 50K or now Author Nation, that they have what is LitRPG, how to write it kind of panel. You just kind of write it, in my opinion, and you just kind of are it. And so anyone who is doing well enough to make it full time, they didn't really set out, they didn't think I'm going to write a thriller. It wasn't really like that. It was like they like video games, they like fantasy. They were already reading on Royal Road. Maybe they now with the newer generation, maybe they were really heavy into webtoons. They're really heavy into manga or anime or comic books, graphic novels, things like that. They were already like that. It's not something that you can just okay, so it needs to have stats, it needs to have this, it needs to have this. It's not going to ever work. And so that's why there is some job security in writing LitRPG if you can actually do it and make a living at it, because it's not something that someone can just easily replicate. There's a vibe that, and I'm sure the narrators can attest to this, that there's and it's not necessarily a good vibe sometimes, but there's a vibe of it. And so that's what I mean by you can't out niche the niche. You're not going to be able to know all, if you get into these Discord groups, you're going to meet Zoomer authors all the way up to dudes in their 50s who own comic book shops. There's just such a wide range of the ways that we try to pass time, so we don't have to accept the facts of life, that you're going to find yourself not able to compete with that. So stick with what you like, and if you can do it correctly, then it'll work. But you're like, when you set your goals too high, or you think like, well, Shirtaloon has 2,515 Patreon subscribers, which I actually heard people talking about before, like just in passing, like, well, he has this much, so he makes $45,000 a month on Patreon. Like, there's extreme outliers in this genre, and they are few and far between. And everyone who doesn't want to be an outlier, but you can also do really well not being an outlier. So just don't discredit that. As for taking notes, yes, don't, like, I've had to talk to authors before, like, why would you waste the time to go and read your own shit that you already wrote? Like, if you are prepared and you take notes at the beginning, then you can work on the next project. And if those questions come up, you have the data. It doesn't take that much longer to do something like write a chapter by chapter synopsis. And I usually do this at least with the first book. So I have something that I can, if the publishing studio wants it, or just for my own reference. And I keep track of the characters, all those types of things. Like, it's something that, like, if you do it now, if you end up having to come back to it, like Dawn and I are having to do, or if you're just working on a lot of projects, it makes your life so much easier. So anything you can do to make your life easier is something I recommend.
Thank you, Harmon. Zen vice again. But what was I going to say? Yes, Andy, please, a niche tip or trick.
Oh, absolutely. First off, again, great advice. And the one thing I will say, Neil brought up one of like the biggest things that kind of goes around, one of the biggest kind of debates among narrators, which is like, read the whole script beforehand, or no, you'll be perfectly fine just reading a chapter ahead and working that way. I will say this, the people who are really good, who do like the chapter ahead stuff, typically, those are experienced narrators, usually working with authors they know, the writing they're at least very familiar with, something like that. If you are a new narrator, for the love of God, don't do that. Like, you will see people recommending that online. Please don't take that advice as a new narrator. Once you have established yourself, once you have learned the patterns of your writer and stuff like that, you have a chance at pulling that off occasionally, but you will regret it. I'm just trying to save you. That's it. It can go very bad very quickly for you. But my biggest like mechanical advice, mine's like, I'll give like a weird kind of voice acting piece of advice that has helped me wildly. Stop emphasizing the first word of a sentence. Stop emphasizing the first word of every sentence. People don't talk like that. People just don't. They do not say, the woman took it and lifted it high. They say, the woman took it and lifted it high. Try to de-emphasize those first words, because that's our natural speaking pattern. Unless there is a specific purpose, you are emphasizing the first word. Inflection, emphasis, those things are huge when you're narrating. And listening to other people's inflections, listening to other people's emphasis, you know what I'm trying to say? That emphasize. Anyway, listen to other people's speech patterns. It can help you a lot in growing your actual character base, because you can do whatever you want with your pitches. You can do whatever you want with your mouth placements and your voice placements and all of this kind of and accents and everything else. But if you don't know how to vary your cadence, if you don't know how to vary your melody, your characters are going to sound similar. It's something that I'm constantly trying to grow and change, because your characters will sound similar if you are constantly using the same melody that you use right now. When you just put it in a different accent, that's going to sound like the same person. No matter how you do it, it's just going to keep sounding like the same person, because you're doing the same melody. So don't do that. Like, try to learn how to do different melodies and stuff. It really helps in differentiating characters. And first,
thank you so much, Andy. Well, we
Hey, Jack.
Yes.
If this goes long, it's totally cool, because I'm doing the takeover next and I don't want to do it. So don't feel like you have to rush. I hate doing these takeovers because it feels like I'm doing an infomercial. It's like, just, hey, I'm Harmon, like, let me sell you this. Like, so if this goes a little long, there's, unless Geneva's yelling at you.
Spit on a dog.
No, Geneva would never yell. She just sort of gently reminds.
I already told her this I'm like, I'm gonna let him know, because I'm sure this will be an interesting conversation. So, and it'd be more interesting than me just sitting here talking in my mask.
How about we do this? How about we do a little outro for each of us, and depending on our kind and benevolent Geneva's opinion on it, and perhaps we could do maybe a rapid fire round of questions from the audience. But let's definitely get the outro sorted now for each of us. Where can people find you? And of course, who are you? And where can people find you? And maybe something you're excited to be working on at the moment. And we can go in the order we've sort of established. Neil.
You can find me at neilhelligers.com. To my knowledge, I'm the only Neil Helligers that exists on the internet, so it's pretty easy to find whatever kind of various places I decide to say things sometimes. Let's see. I'm just another series wrap, Mark of the Krijic 5 by Think Twice, wrapping up I guess hopefully on Monday, and then after that, Outcast in Another World 5 by Kamikaze Potato, which is a fantastic series as well too, which is also kind of rounding the corner after another 40 hours or so of book. Do come check me out. Always say hello. I'm always, like I said, kind of as these other narrators have said too, always willing to give advice, because only through a strong foundation and pillars and gutters do we grow and prosper and not flood.
Oh, so well said. Tess?
Hi. Everything can be found at tessirondale.com. I've got links to social on there, links to my Discord. As I mentioned earlier, I'm on Discord nearly every day narrating. Always delighted to have new listeners and narrators with any questions. I always am so happy for any distractions while I'm working, so please come on and bug me. You can find the link for that at tessirondale.com. I'm currently working on Talon's Saga Book 4, which is a lesbian lit RPG by Benjamin Medrano, and I'm 100 pages away from the end.
Gang, no joke here. When Tess was recording her section of my audiobook, I tuned in to those Discord sessions. Get over to Tess's Discord. It is a great community, fostering really good relationships, and Tess is an absolute bastion of the field, like just absolutely brilliant at what she does, and very hilarious and entertaining as well. And perhaps with them, Tess, a few little swears perhaps dropped when things go wrong.
Oh, well, you were there on an odd day if it was only a few little swears. I swear a lot. Maybe not as much as Andy, but it's fine. Thank you, Jack. That was very kind.
I have behaved myself in this panel. Okay.
Now, Dawn, can we get an outro from you?
So you can literally find me anywhere. It's dawnchapmanauthor.com from our website. I have my own Discord, which is and I'm literally in all the narrators Discords. I'm literally online everywhere. Something I'm excited about. I'm excited about my new series for next year, Interstellar Pawn, which is a sci-fi progression fantasy lit RPG, whichever umbrella you want to put it under. It's with a new publisher which I signed with this year, and we're doing rapid release, so it'll be February, March, and April for 3 books with Neil Thorne as the narrator, and I am doing the editing on it at the moment, and pickups I'm just doing. So that's me.
Thank you, Dawn. Appreciate it. And Mr. Cooper, Harmon.
Hey everybody, my name's Harmon. You can find me at harmoncooper.com. I write on Royal Road as Goblin Wrangler, and I am currently publishing chapters daily for Doom System Survivor, which is probably my favorite thing that I've ever written, and that's because it's going to come out on my 10-year anniversary of writing in game lit RPG, and so I've kind of encapsulated all of that into this post-apocalyptic lit RPG. Aethon Books will be publishing it next year. I'm also have Reborn Assassin, the 3rd book coming out, and also the 3rd book for A Pub in the Underworld, which is a cozy fantasy, lit RPG fantasy, is with Podium now, and that will be out in March. And then finally, I'm working on a co-write with Luke Chimolenko called Aetherforged Rebirth, which is lit RPG progression fantasy. It is the coolest thing that I've written, I think, with someone else, because I haven't written anything with someone else, so that makes it the coolest automatically. But what does make it interesting is Luke is a very heavy plotter, and I'm a very heavy gardener. So he gave me basically like a 1,000-page book condensed into 30 pages that are the densest notes I've ever seen in my entire life, but also having the most amount of flexibility that I've ever really had in like seeing someone's outline. And it's really cool to see the what's come out of it, and I can't wait for the audience to all see it, because it will also be coming out on my 10-year anniversary in writing in the genre. So, and he's kind of like an OG in the genre, and so it'll be really interesting to see what people think. So that's it.
Not just interesting, Harmon, but exciting. I'm excited to engage with that.
I'm excited. Hopefully, I live up to the hype, because we have another project signed that Neil's going to narrate. Fantastic. Called Eternal Realms tentatively.
Terribly exciting. And Andy, your outro.
My name is Andrea Parsnow. You can find me at andreaparsnow.com or Monday through Saturday over on Discord all day, streaming my workday. Discord.gg/Andrea Parsnow. I encourage you to visit for the cursing, the fun, the laughter, the tears, all of it. It's very raw. It's an experience. I recommend listening once or twice at the minimum just to hear what goes into it. Other than that, I am currently off stream until the middle of October or on the middle of November because I'm working on like one of the very few books I'm not allowed to stream. But starting after that, I will be doing Heavenly Chaos is what I'll be coming back to. Right now, I'm working on Hunt Song, and I encourage you to go check out the new Wandering Inn that's coming out soon, and also KT Hannah's book Damage that just released recently.
Glorious, thank you. Alas, friends, Romans, countrymen, we have run over time, and I'll wrap things up now. But should you have a burning question, reach out to these wonderful people. They have kindly opened that door, and I would advise you to take up on it because they are fonts of wisdom. But yes, I thank you to the wonderful panelists for your insights and your perception. And I'm Jack Fields. I'm an fledgling audiobook narrator and an author. My book narrated by Neil Helligers and Tess Arundel. Scarlet Citadel is going to be audiobook is hopefully coming out very soon. No release date TBC. But yes, thank you so much. And will we do the awkward farewell? Sort of waving, perhaps a queenly wave, perhaps, or Tess is waving. Audience,
I'm waving with both hands.
Farewell. Thank you.